Hi there, welcome to again the first video of a sequence of videos I'm going to make taking a new approach to programming the Cessna 172, and this is the steam gauge version, not the glass cockpit version. I think this one might only be available in the premium or deluxe or whatever version of the simulator, but it's still worth seeing how I do things, because the techniques are the key point, and they will transfer to other aircraft. Once you learn the techniques, you can then program pretty much anything you want to on your own aircraft. But the first thing I need to do here is to plan the layout, how I'm going to use my hardware. And the hardware I've got available to me is a Stream Deck, the XL version, a MIDI controller, the Behringer X-Touch Mini, and we'll talk you through that in a bit. And I've got a Honeycomb yoke and throttle quadrant. And previously I didn't have those. I had a Logitech system, so the Stream Deck had to do a fair bit of work emulating all the light switches, but I don't need to use that anymore because I've got actual physical switches on the Honeycomb yoke, which is so much easier to work with. So it's all about planning. What I want to do is to create templates in Axis and Ohs, and also make good use of the new input events, because they deal with, and the animation of the switches and things are so much better. So this is what I want to plan out. I've already got a template for Axis and Ohs for the switches that are on the yoke, so that's already built, so I can just load that into this aircraft. And that's what I want to achieve with all the other ones, creating templates for the 530, the 430, so that if you start working on an aircraft and it's got the same avionics hardware, the template's already there and I can just drop it in and it works straight away. So I'll be creating a template for the 530, the 430. The autopilot is pretty well done because it's built into the Honeycomb throttle quadrant, and I haven't sort of changed the Microsoft default profile for this, and it works pretty well. I've done a few other things to the taken off the throttle quadrant and allocated those to Axis and Ohs, and we'll talk about those when we get to them. And there's obviously going to be a profile for the transponder for the ADF, and I'll have a profile for the controls on the cockpit itself. So that's what I'm going to do, is just build a number of profiles. But it's all about planning, and particularly planning the layout for the X-Touch. That's the device that takes a fair bit of the work. If you've not seen the X-Touch, it's a MIDI music controller originally, and so you've got these 8 rotaries here. In fact, effectively you've got 16 rotaries, because you've got layer A, and if you press layer B, they all can have a different function. And these rotaries work infinitely in each direction. There's no stop on them. They can continue to go right the way around. And you've also got the push switches. When you press these switches, they act as a push switch. Again, the layer A and layer B are completely independent, so it's like having 16 switches and 16 rotaries here. Same with these buttons here. These are sort of soft push buttons, and there's 16 of them. But again, effectively it's 32, because you can switch to layer B. So you've got plenty of switches to work with. These are labelled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, these buttons here, in terms of programming the LEDs on them, start at 0. So it's 0 through to 7 here, and then 8 through to 15 here. And I'm going to stay with that numbering system, because it makes it easier when you want to write the scripts to control the LEDs as well. And you'll see what I mean there. So, the first thing to do is to look at the G530, and it's got 2 rotaries, one on the left, one on the right. So there's stacked rotaries, and what I want to do is to use one rotary for that one and one rotary for that one. So I'm going to have the ability that when I press the button on here, I want it to toggle between megahertz and kilohertz mode, as if it's going from the outer to the inner, because that's how this one will work. And this one will use another rotary to toggle as if we were turning the outer or the inner. So I'll have megahertz and kilohertz on rotary 1 and the GPS outer and inner on a rotary 2. So that means that the push switch on the end of it isn't going to be the one that switches you from comms to V-lock. That's what it would normally do here. I'm going to allocate that to button 8 on my X-Touch, which would be this one here. And again, I can't use the end of this to be the push to get the cursor, so I'm going to allocate that to button 9, which is this one here. So that's how I'm going to allocate those. I also have to have a button that will swap the standby and active, and I'm going to use just one button for that, button 0, and just have it working so that when it's in comms mode, it swaps the comms over, and if I'm in the V-lock mode, it'll transfer that frequency over. So you'll see that it's this working, and then it's just allocating these buttons. To see all those ones across there, just go button 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7, so that takes up one row. And then along the bottom here, I allocate those: the range, the direct to, the menu, the clear button, and the enter button. So the layout kind of looks a bit like this. So I'll have the megahertz and kilohertz on that one there, toggled by that one. I'll have the outer and inner toggled by pressing that button there. This one here will swap the active, and it's whether you're in comms mode or the V-lock mode, determined by that. Click on the cursor here to bring the cursor up, and then there's all the other buttons there. And I've color coded this all green, so I know that that is all to do with the Garmin, the GPS thing. And I've got another button here which will swap us between talking to the 530 and the 430, because really the buttons are pretty much identical on the 530 and the 430. Spot the difference here really. That's got VNav and this one hasn't. So pretty much the same buttons. So again, just using a bit of code to toggle here whether we're talking to the 530 or the 430. So that's kind of that's the first layout for the 530 and the 430. If we look at the actual cockpit itself, I've got a few rotaries, sort of controllers that I want to use here. So clearly I'm going to need to use the Colesman, the barometer here. So that's on rotary 3. And I also have been sort of learning to fly a bit more realistically and having the gyro drift turned on. So I don't use it that often, so I'm putting that also on rotary 3. And again, clicking the end of it will toggle between the two, the Colesman and the gyro drift. Now the OBS1, this one here, can be controlled directly from the Honeycomb throttle. There is a knob on there that will make that work, but there isn't one on there that you can use for OBS2. And if you want to do proper radio nav, find a location using two different VORs, two different frequencies, you need to be able to control both of them. So I'm actually going to also put it on rotary 4, both of them, and again toggle between them by pressing the button on top, so I can control each of those independently with one rotary. So rotary 4 is going to have that, and rotary 5 will have the heading bug, so that we can move this bug around. So add the cockpit to it. that's the barometer gyro with the toggle pressing on the end of that. OBS 1 and 2 toggled with that, and heading is just this one here. The autopilot, again, so so much of this is actually programmed in. The autopilot on-off is in the Honeycomb throttle, the heading, the nav, the approach mode, the back course, and altitude hold is all on here, so that works really well. Up and down, well, you can control that using the rotary that's built into the Honeycomb throttle quadrant. It doesn't work 100% perfectly, and when I come to that video you'll see where the problem is. It does work, but it doesn't really change the display properly. So I've allocated those to up and down to rotary 6 for the up and down, which you use for a couple of things, but mostly for the vertical speed, changing your vertical speed up and down. So that's there. The altitude select, again, that's got an inner and an outer, and I've put those on separate buttons for separate rotaries. Rotary 7, rotary 8 have got those. Now, as far as I can see, the arm button here is pretty ineffectual in the simulation as written by Microsoft or Sobo. I put it onto rotary 7, the push on there, so we can press that. I've not really made it work pretty well, and I've also had a go at putting on the Stream Deck. Again, very doubtful whether it works. The barometer one is an interesting one, which when I come to that video you'll see what that does. The idea is that you need to manually set this barometer to the current pressure. It starts off in hectopascals, and you have to use this button here to switch it to inches of mercury if that's what you want to work in, and then you use these two controls here to set that. So it works with those rotaries. So there are a few bits and pieces here that need to go on here, and again we're in layer A, so we have the vertical speed up and down here, the autopilot outer and inner, which I've got on separate rotaries, and pressing here will try to simulate the arm and the barometer. So we've pretty much filled up layer A here now with the 430 and the 530, what's on the cockpit itself, and here with the autopilot, and with using that with the functions that are actually on the throttle quadrant, we're pretty much there with that. So the transponder, well, this is going to be on layer B, and I'm going to put the ident button on the first one at the bottom of the buttons, so that'll be layer B number 8, and then I'm just going to put again, it's in bank B, I'm going to put obviously 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the digits here straight across on that layer, and then carrying on here after the bank B8 button, I'm going to put the clear, the VFR, and I'm going to use the rotary 8, one in the very right hand corner on bank B, so that I simulate it going through the various modes. Here the off, standby, test, on, alt. So this is going to be layer B, and it's these sort of pinky colour ones. There's my digits to press in, there's the press ident, the clear, and the set it to VFR, so it just instantly goes to 7,000 for VFR flights. And this rotary here is one that's going to do, so bank B, this rotary will do the mode for the transponder, because you don't use it that often, you don't change it that often once you're flying, so these are the less used things going on to layer B. Again, the ADF, don't use it that often, but I have been using it as I've been sort of emulating old school radio nav flying. So the way this one works is that one ring here does the hundreds digit. This one here will do the tens digit, and if you press it, toggle it, it'll do the units digit. So on B, layer B, rotary 6 will have the hundreds. This one here will have the tens and units. So when I'm using rotary 7, I'll have to use the press switch on the end of that to toggle between the two. Then these modes here, ADF mode, BFO mode, they're all going to be on buttons 11, 12. This one here swaps from the standby to the active frequency, so that will be on there. And these are timer buttons, the flight time and can't remember what one it is. Don't use the timer on this one very much, but there's the set and reset for the timer. Oh, elapsed time, yeah, total flight time and elapsed time, so you can set a stopwatch kind of thing. And the ADF itself has a card behind it, the direction card behind it, which we need to rotate if we can use the ADF properly. So that'll be on rotary 5. So these light blue ones, these are my ADF. Layer B, that one changes the card. This one is the hundreds, the tens and the units, and there's the toggle for that. And across the bottom here is just the buttons for the various modes. So that's how that one's going to work. So we're pretty much filled up. Everything's available to us. The switches themselves are all on the yoke. Those ones are on the yoke. The fuel pump I put on throttle quadrant. There are seven switches on the Honeycomb yoke. Throttle quadrant. So on the throttle quadrant, button 1 is going to be my fuel pump on and off, and the pitot heat will be on button 2, and everything else is already allocated straight to the Honeycomb yoke itself, because that's got all the switches for that. In the center panel, well, we've obviously got the throttle and the mixture, so they're just on the throttle quadrant, and it's got a flaps control on the quadrant, and my trim wheel, that's on there. The parking brake I put on switch number 7 on the throttle quadrant. So what I've got here are 2 stacked rotaries for the various internal lights. I've got one which controls the light levels for the radio, for the panel lights, the glare shield and the pedestal. So they're going to go on to layer B, rotary 1, and again using the push button to toggle between the two, because that kind of emulates the stacked rotary here, and the same for these which are going to be on rotary 2. And overhead we've got 2 floodlights, so I'm going to use rotary 3 and toggle between them to do the left and the right floodlights which are in the overhead panels. So they will go here. There's my radio panel option, and that one toggles between them, and this one here is for the glare shield and the pedestal, that toggles between them, and floodlights 1 and 2 toggles between them. So that's pretty much the layout that I'm going to be working with on my X-Touch Mini. Now if we go back and look in the actual panel itself, the cockpit, there are a couple of other little buttons here. One which is about the source, whether it's nav or GPS. You control that normally with this CDI button here, but that one's there for sort of legacy purposes, and if these go down you can check, you've got a manual switch there. So what I'm going to do, let's come down here, this OBS source, I'm going to put those onto the switches on the throttle quadrant. Switch 3 and switch 4 can have those two allocated to them, but so you don't really use them particularly. That you usually use the buttons on the GPS system itself for that to work. The radio panel, I've already got that program from the my previous setup for this aircraft, so everything's going to be on the Stream Deck, so I can change whether I want to hear the marker or the Morse code for the ADF or DME, or for nav 1 and nav 2, so I can hear whether I'm tuned into the right frequencies. Don't use it very often, but I have got it programmed on the Stream Deck, so I can show you that when we get to that one there. And there is a volume control here which I can put onto the slider of the MIDI controller. And that's really about it. That's the plan, the grand plan that we're going to work with. So if I just put that back on this, you can see that's the range, the layout that I'm going to have on my X-Touch Mini. Okay, so I'll see you on the next video. I'm going to start to work our way through the code required for each of the templates.